This is my third theory, the quote, nonsense theory. On this half of the chart, we have thinkers that are more lexical. Lexical thinkers think in symbols, and symbols, such as language, have definitions that every thinker agrees upon. Like, everyone agrees what the word sad means. It means you're sad. And it's hard to define that, but, we all understand what sadness is. And lexical thinkers think in that term and think in symbols, such as those words like sad, which makes them easier to understand because they think in symbols that all of society agrees upon. So one might say these thinkers make sense because they think in symbols. Okay. On the right side of the chart, we have impressionist thinkers. Impressionist thinkers think somewhat unsymbolically. Their thoughts are removed from symbols that all of society agrees upon. Okay, so they think more with feelings and with just how they feel about something and the impression they get from it. It's unsymbolic. It's removed from a definition that all of society agrees upon, which means their thoughts to the rest of the society can seem somewhat nonsensical. It can also be hard for it can even be hard for impressionist thinkers to communicate with each other because their thoughts are unsymbolic and thus their thoughts are not agreed upon by anyone else in society. Like, the definitions of their thoughts are not agreed upon by anyone else in society. Two new types might struggle to communicate with each other because their thoughts are not, they don't think in symbols, but the things they do think in are not agreed upon by either of them. They may have an easier time understanding each other, though, because they both suffer from the same dilemma. On the bottom of the chart, we have more linear thinkers. Linear thinkers' jumps in thought are from A to B, the most linear. They go from relevant thought to very relevant thought, one at a time, and they don't, so their thoughts are generally easier to follow because they're going one at a time and they're taking their time with each of those thoughts. You might say because those jumps in thought are easier to follow, are smaller and somewhat easier to follow, that means their thoughts make a little bit more sense. On the other hand, more lateral thinkers tend to jump from point A to point B. These things are related, right? And they're just over here, and now we're talking about this. They might not even realize how they got here in their brain, but they just jumped over these more relevant ideas, and now we're over here. Okay? And that can be hard to follow, especially for more linear thinkers. And even other lateral thinkers might, if you're jumping from here to here as a lateral thinker who's jumped from here to the opposite side might have just the hardest time as a linear thinker keeping up. So in general, lateral thinkers can be hard to follow, which I guess you could say sometimes seems like nonsense. Okay, so if this is nonsense, if these people think in logical and thought relevancy skips, they can be hard to follow and again, nonsense. While this side of the chart seems to think in unsymbolic thought, which is, in some sense, nonsense. That means everything on this side of the freaking thing, all these people are somewhat, quote, nonsense. And everyone on this side of the chart makes, quote, sense. At least to other thinkers, because they're just, this side's easier to follow. And this side thinks in symbols, which we all agree upon. Okay, so that's my quote nonsense theory. And then I wanted to touch on nerd, goth, prep, and jack. Okay, why do these make sense? Okay, well, let's start with these corners, the most sensical and the most nonsensical. The prep, right? Okay, why does the prep make sense? Because the prep's thoughts and jumps generally as a stereotype are very straightforward. And, they could tell you exactly why they're doing what they do. Why do they like Johnny? Because he's the coolest guy in school. Okay? That's very straightforward. That's a very straightforward thing. And told you straight up, there's, it's very easy to follow. the goth, okay? Their thoughts make the least sense. They're very lateral, you know, they're having a lot of thoughts, and they're very impressionist. They couldn't describe those thoughts to you in symbolic terms, okay? And you know, you can see that in the goth. They do a lot of weird shit. They you know, they dress up in like all black, and you're like, probably they don't even know why they do it other than it's cool, right? So I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying, you know, goths are generally hard for other members of society to understand because they're doing something that's kind of like, they have all these thoughts and they can't tell you about them because it's just depressed and goth, right? So that's why that one seems to work there. Jock, of course, pure instinct. This is the easiest one to understand. It's where very linear thought meets very impressionist thought. The jock could tell you, you know, why he likes to prep, like, oh, she's hot, that's why I like her. You know, you understand it, but you know, you couldn't, like, I don't know if you could really expand upon that other than, you know, primal instinct type reasoning. And then over here we have the nerd. He could, you know, he's got all these lateral thoughts. He's into Star Wars and science fiction and all that garbage. And you're like, he could explain to you why it's cool, but you don't know what inside of him makes him even like that, because you're nowhere near as enthusiastic about these things as he is. So that's why the nerd fits in this corner. Again, it's important not to ascribe personalities to these corners, to everything, but I think these are actually kind of helpful. Again, personality is not really involved. Like, you know, these people over here can really like Star Wars, and you know, any of these people can like Star Wars, right? But you know, these guys are involved in that fantasy. You just have the brain to be involved in that fantasy universe with the all that garbage. These people, I don't know, poetry or something. You get what I'm saying? Don't ascribe a personality and necessarily certain skills and necessarily certain likes and dislikes. But this thought pattern of jock and the thought pattern of prep and the thought pattern of nerd and the thought pattern of goth really come together when you look at this from you know, quote, nonsense. Hopefully that made sense, and hopefully it was enjoyable for you guys. Thank you. Bye.